Welcome back to Camo Sports, and today we're going to take a little break from talking about the NBA, and we're going to be talking about the news that is happening in the NFL right now. The main thing we're going to be covering today is the Deebo Samuel trade. Deebo Samuel was traded to the Washington Commanders a couple of days ago for a 2025 fifth-round pick, and I'm going to be talking about how I feel about this trade. So for the Commanders side, let's start with the good. Deebo is a Swiss Army knife. He can pretty much do everything. He plays in the slot. He can play out wide. He can play running back and give you some carries from time to time. I think he's actually thrown a touchdown too in his NFL career. So he's a very versatile player, and he's just a gadget player that any coach would love to have. He's a very physically imposing player. He's not afraid to lower his shoulder and run you over. And he weighs enough where he can actually run over linebackers and makes DBs look stupid when they're actually trying to tackle him. And the type of player Deebo Samuel is, I think he's actually going to fit with the Commanders pretty well, because if you watch the Commanders last season, their offensive line is not great, and Jaden Daniels has to make very quick decisions and get rid of the ball very quickly. And Deebo Samuel fits the mold of the receiver that they're going to have to unless they drastically improve their offensive line, because Deebo Samuel can take a quick slant to the house by breaking tackles and just outrunning you. And his yards after contact is exactly what a team needs when you don't have an offensive line like the Lions or the Eagles. And another thing, their offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, is an offensive mastermind, and now he has a new toy that can play all over the field and you have to game plan for. So on paper, Jane Daniels now has a new dynamic duo that he can go to with the receiving core with Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel. But now let's talk about the negative sides of this trade. Is Deebo Samuel is already 29, which 29 isn't technically that old, but he's a very old 29. And what I mean by that is the way that Deebo Samuel plays the game of football, he invites contact, like I just said. So he's going to lower his shoulder and he's not going to avoid contact. So he's not necessarily protecting himself like some players would do. This causes his body to break down, and he's basically a running back with how much mileage is on his body right now, and the injuries are starting to pile up. Deebo Samuel has missed 18 out of possible 85 games in his NFL career, which means if I did my math correctly, that would mean that he has missed 21% of his games, which basically means 1 out of every 5 games he's out with an injury, which is really bad. And the biggest part of his skill set, like I mentioned earlier, is yards after contact or run after the catch. But his run after the catch stats have went down every single year, and last year being by far his worst year. In 2021, he averaged 87 yards run after the catch, and then in 2022, he only averaged 48 yards. And then 2023, he actually went up, which was 59. But then in 2024, this previous season was by far his lowest of his career at 44. And who knows what he's going to do in 2025. He could have a bounce back season, but considering his age, the likelihood of him actually increasing that and being a highly productive player may be over with. I don't really know for that. Also, there was a leaked picture of him at the Super Bowl when he was wearing an Eagles jersey, and if you look at that picture, he looks a little overweight. He looks like he has a gut and a beer belly. Now, he's also in the offseason, and he was coming off of an injury, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he can lose that weight, but he looked too big, in my opinion. And there's also the money side of this, too. Deebo Samuel this year is going to make $17 million per year, and he only has 1 year left on his deal. So they're probably going to have to give him an extension. How much is he going to demand? I don't really know with the type of player he is and his injury history, but I assume he's going to ask for a pretty penny, in my opinion. And for the Commanders side of this, was weapons really your number one need? Because you already have your number one receiver in Terry McLaurin. And Brown and Luke McCaffrey, don't get me wrong, they're not good. But they had moments this year, and I think they're actually serviceable, in my opinion. Zach Ertz, he is old, but he just came off of a great year, and I don't think he's retiring unless I just haven't heard anything about it. So was it really necessary to trade for an expensive, injury-prone receiver who has had issues and created problems when he doesn't get the ball and he's not the focal point of the offense? Was it really worth it for that one? When I think they could have spent their money in free agency on a serviceable receiver for much cheaper. Maybe even get 2 receivers for the price of $17 million. Or you could have got a receiver in the late rounds of this draft, maybe something like that. I also think that protecting Jaden Daniels and getting him a better offensive line is much more important than getting a player like Deebo Samuel, because if we rank the thing that you need to do to win football games, protecting the quarterback is going to be very high on that list. And the Washington offensive line was not great at points last year, so I felt like they could have saved some of that money that they could have spent on Deebo Samuel and could have invested that into the offensive line. And they also have holes in their defense too. I mean, they could rush the passer a little bit better. I think their secondary could use some adjustments. So they could have spent that money elsewhere and filled some holes on that defense because their defense was like middle of the pack last year. Now, they still do have $64 million in cap space. In theory, they do still have a lot of money. But if you never go for Deebo Samuel and you add 17 of that, that has a whole lot of cap space to make a big move. And for the 49ers side of this, they were just put in a bad situation. I mean, Deebo Samuel clearly didn't want to be there, and I'm pretty sure he demanded a trade. And his market was obviously not very high because he's been on the trade block for like 3 years from what we've heard. And the best they could get is a 5th-round pick. And the San Francisco 49ers are going to be absorbing $31.5 million in dead cap money for their salary cap, which is close to what the Falcons are going to have to if we decide to cut Kirk Cousins. But let's not talk about that. Let's not try to get super negative. But the 49ers missed their window, and they're on the decline. I mean, they made it to 2 Super Bowls, ended up losing both of them in like the past 4 or 5 years. And they're paying a lot of their stars a lot of money right now, so they don't really have cap flexibility at the moment, and all their stars are injury prone. And this is because of how the 49ers play and the Kyle Shanahan, that they play physical brand of football, and especially on defense, they're very physical as well. And when you're that physical, injuries are going to happen, so you need depth. But when you're paying all these guys, like a Fred Warner or a Nick Bosa or a Trent Williams or a Brandon Ayuk, for that example, you don't really have the money to get depth, so you're just relying on somebody who's barely on the roster to make plays, and that's just not a recipe for success. Not to mention that you already have to pay Brock Purdy this year, next year, which I'd imagine he probably wants to be the highest paid quarterback in the league because Dak Prescott right now is the highest paid quarterback, if I'm not wrong. And Brock Purdy has accomplished more than Dak Prescott in his NFL career. So if I'm Brock Purdy's agent, I'm going to try to get more money. I'm going to try to get more than $60 million. But I can guarantee you that he's at least going to make $50 million. And if you watch the 49ers this season, when Brock Purdy doesn't have all of his weapons, he doesn't look very great. So that's just going to be a big question mark that they're going to have to answer if they're actually going to pay him or not. And last year with the whole fiasco of paying Brandon Ayuk, and he went out for the season, so hopefully he recovers. But even when he was healthy, $40 million a year for Brandon Ayuk, I feel like was just way too much money, in my opinion, when I don't think he's a number one receiver. I think he benefits from the Kyle Shanahan offense, of course, but he also benefited from having so many weapons around him where they can't solely focus on him. I say all that to say this. I think a fire sale in San Francisco is coming, and it could come very soon, in my opinion, because they need to stay under the cap. So players like Fred Warner could come available, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and if Nick Bosa ends up being available, the Falcons better call immediately. I mean, call him right now, see what the temperature is, if we can get him at all. But I could see them blowing it up because this year is probably the very last year that they actually could compete. But going after this year, they're probably going to be closer to a rebuild than actually a contender, in my opinion. So to recap the trade, do I think Deebo Samuel can hold up? Maybe. Is he the same player he was when he was taking over playoff games and pretty much carrying the 49ers offense for a second there? Maybe. Has he lost a step? Maybe. Is he just a big name rather than a game changer at this point of his career? Maybe. Is he the final piece that the Commanders seem to feel like that they got, and are they now true contenders and can compete with like the Lions and the Eagles? If he's healthy, he sure helps, but I don't think this is the final piece. I still think they're a few pieces away, in my opinion. But I'm also not counting out Jaden Daniels because what he put on display was absolutely incredible last year. But I still do think they are a few pieces on offense and defense away. Some other news that happened across the NFL the past couple of days. Davante Adams a few hours ago just got released from the Jets. So he's probably going to follow his buddy in Aaron Rodgers, and what's being reported, Aaron Rodgers is likely going to the Giants this year. So maybe he follows. I don't really know. He's still like a top 15 receiver probably in the NFL, maybe top 20, but he is on the older side, and there's no clue what he's actually going to demand as far as money-wise. And he also can be a locker room problem and a diva at times, but he's still a very good receiver. I'm very interested to see what happens with him. But some of the other news is Travis Kelce announced that he's back with the Chiefs. He's not the player he once was, and he has lost a step, but he's still a good veteran presence, and he still can read defenses and know where the soft spots are. Even though it was not there in the Super Bowl, the connection of Mahomes and Kelce is still very good in my opinion, and he can produce as a safety blanket, but his run after the catch is nowhere near where, like I said, it's just going to be a bunch of him finding the soft spots in the zone and picking up like 5 yards to just get the first down, but that's really all Travis Kelce can really do anymore. Another big news is Matthew Stafford is staying with the Rams after being rumored that he might leave or he might get traded. If you remember correctly, the Rams were a flag away and a pass interference away where Darius Slay just absolutely tackled the Rams receiver from beating the Eagles. Now, would the Rams have beat the Chiefs? Probably not, but the Eagles are the reigning Super Bowl champions. So the Rams are not that far away. Their defense took major strides last year in the second half of that season, especially their pass rush with Verse. And I don't see why that couldn't improve from next year. They are getting rid of Cooper Kupp, and he's on the trade block. But Cooper Kupp also wasn't that productive last year, and he's actually been a very injury-prone player, just like Deebo Samuel, like I just talked about. But the Rams are a sleeper Super Bowl team if they have a good offseason and a good draft, so watch out for them. The last news that I'm going to talk about is T. Higgins getting franchise tagged. This is the second year in a row where he's got franchise tagged, so I imagine T. Higgins is going to demand a trade if they don't work something out. I mean, he was tweeting out about it, and he didn't seem very happy about it, which I don't really understand what the Bengals are doing because they're not paying anybody significant right now other than Joe Burrow, so I don't understand why they're refusing to pay T. Higgins, which I don't think he's demanding for like $50 million or something. I imagine it's like 30 to 40 range. And they still haven't paid Jamar Chase, and they refused to pay him last offseason. He's at worst the second best receiver in the NFL. So I don't really understand what they're doing there either. But they need to keep both of them so they can make Joe Burrow happy, because he's made it abundantly clear that he's not going to be happy if you don't keep both of those. And Joe Burrow is about the only thing going good with the Bengals right now. But the Bengals have a reputation of not paying people in the past. Thank you for Jesse Bates, by the way. But we will see. And it's going to get very scary for the Bengals if they don't get T. Higgins, because who knows? Joe Burrow could be out the door. You never know. And that's all the NFL news I'm going to be talking about today. The NFL Combine just got wrapped up, but I'm not going to be talking about the Combine because I think the Combine is just stupid in my opinion. I mean, Arian Smith may go in the first round because he's so freaking fast, but he can't catch a football, but now he's ranked as like a top 8 receiver in this class. It just tells you how stupid it is, and I don't really care for the Combine at all. But I'm sure I'll talk about the prospects at some point, so be on the lookout for that one. And that's going to be the end of this episode. If you enjoyed, please give this video a like, and be sure to subscribe and leave a comment in the comment section below if you have anything for me. The offer is still on the table. We're still at 45 subscribers, and once we get to 50 subscribers, I am going to be having a special guest. So if you don't want to just listen to me and you want to listen to somebody else, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And that's all I got for y'all today. I know this episode is probably on the shorter side, but there's actually not that much to talk about. But once the NBA playoffs and the NFL draft get a little bit closer, I'm sure I'll have even more to talk about. So thank you for listening, and I'll see y'all next week.